So welcome everyone. I'm Mica Fisher. I'm the Managing Director at the National Coalition for Community Capital, or NC3. So I'm going to be moderating this panel today. Thank you so much for joining the panel about cooperatives. We're talking about the intersection of cooperatives and crowdfunding, and something that's really near and dear to my heart. Before I joined NC3, I worked in the cooperative movement and I'm still connected to it. So I'm really pleased to be doing this, and thanks to Devin for hosting this space for all of us. So first I'll give some background on NC3 and then we can dive into the panel. So our mission is to educate, advocate, and activate community capital. And we define community capital as a set of strategies that allows people of any economic status to invest in their own community. So we say community capital projects utilize locally sourced and locally invested financial capital, and they are raised from an economically diverse group of investors. And to kind of set the stage, I just want to point out that we have a defined set of principles of community capital. I'll post these in the chat, actually. Let's see, copy link. You can check them out here. And so we ask our partners to act in accordance with these principles, but I'm pointing these out because I think there's some overlap with this panel. Our third principle is that community capital empowers and serves all stakeholders. And I think this is really connected to the cooperative movement and really demonstrated on this panel. So community capital projects work to incorporate the perspectives and interests of a diverse set of local stakeholders when they are considering their design and management. Whereas typically new businesses or development projects are designed and governed by wealthy investors, investment managers, or other gatekeepers who are primarily interested in financial returns. And by contrast, community capital projects intentionally balance the need of many stakeholders fairly and equitably. And they definitely ensure that none are harmed by the venture's activities. So I see cooperatives as being really aligned with this third principle because they have a larger set of stakeholders, and the decision-making power is not just tied to the wealthy. So they operate and govern themselves under the one member, one vote rule. Cooperatives have their own set of principles, the international cooperative principles, and one of those is concern for community. So that kind of brings in the multi-stakeholder management and design. And for those of you who are coming to this panel unfamiliar with cooperatives, I just wanted to give a base definition. The simple definition that I like to use is that co-ops are businesses that are owned and democratically controlled by their members. And on this panel, we're going to show a bunch of different types of cooperatives with different classes of membership. So I'll dig into the panel a little bit more. We are talking about, as I said, the intersection of co-ops and crowdfunding. I have a little bit of a caveat for this panel. We're not just going to be talking about regulation crowdfunding like the majority of this conference, but all the different legal strategies that co-ops can use to raise funds from their community, from the crowd, quote unquote. So you'll hear from co-ops that are doing this in different ways, including regulation crowdfunding. And I actually am going to get some help from get some legal support on describing this in more detail from our first panelist. So I'm going to introduce Brett Heger. Brett's an attorney that specializes in this work in both community capital raises and working with cooperatives. And he's going to give an overview of these kind of methods. Do I see a hand sticking up from you, Chip? No, you're.
I was scratching.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to pass it off to you, Brett.
Thanks, Mica. So yeah, don't worry, I'm not going to get into the details of securities laws. We can do that another day. You can probably find much of it online. But just to sort of orient just a little bit, my name is Brett Heger. As Mica said, I'm an attorney currently working a lot with social impact organizations and on community wealth building projects. And what that means is we have a lot of cooperatives. That's an amazing tool for helping build wealth in some of our communities. We do a lot of Main Street and sort of democratized grassroots finance work. And some of my favorite is when those two intersect. So I was just thrilled to be asked to be on this panel. My firm also practices as a cooperative. So we have 3 attorneys, all of whom are worker members. And as Mica has sort of alluded to, that involves group decision-making, profit sharing, transparency. So it's really exciting. As someone who's worked with a number of different clients that are cooperatives or raising money in cooperative values, I just wanted to, again, give like a very quick overview / preview of some of the tools that you're seeing here, that you're going to see here, that I've seen successful for cooperatives. So one is more of that donation type crowdfunding. So Kickstarters, GoFundMe, where you actually are not raising securities. You don't need the same securities legal work that you would, and your community is just giving you cash in exchange for love and high fives and, you know, big spaghetti dinners or whatever it is you choose to offer, swag. The second one to keep in mind is, I guess you would call it sort of more private friends and family type offerings. One of the unique features of cooperatives is that they have sort of so many members, it's more than one member in a leadership position, and part of why they're uniquely positioned to sort of do a broader base of fundraising, bringing in smaller chunks of money from a lot of people, is because you have the advantage of everyone's network in the cooperative. And so family and friend type offerings are usually done without meaningful advertising, but tapping into your direct network. Number 3 is a number of states have specific exemptions and opportunities for cooperatives to raise money. Actually doing very broad advertising. California has that. I know Illinois, I believe Massachusetts. And so Ojan and the EV-Prec team have taken advantage of that, and they'll be able to tell you some more about that. Number 4 that you'll get a sense of today is the regulation crowdfunding and how that intersects with the world of cooperatives. Obviously, there's been lots on that already during this panel, but we have some folks from the Drivers Cooperative here as well. Sorry, and I meant to say Diane of the local crowd will talk a little bit about the crowdfunding that she does in that more donation type style, and how she's built this amazing platform along with her colleagues that really focuses on, you know, not just raising money for anything, but really focusing on building communities and how that's an opportunity for co-ops. And then finally, thinking about just scale and opportunity of scale, one tool that's being used by cooperatives is Regulation A, which really lets you, in many ways, raise a significant amount of money, up to $75 million a year, on a national scale from, you know, a wide range of investors, including, you know, non-accredited folks. You know, so this can be at very small, relatively quite small amounts of money. And EV-Prec has also had some experience with that, so they'll tell you about that. So that's my sort of kickoff orientation. And then, Mica, I forgot who I handed off to next to actually introduce themselves.
I'll take it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Fred. Yeah, so now we're going to dig into the rest of the panelists who are really going to share their experience with one of those strategies and sort of the benefits that they've seen from that and any of the challenges. So the first person up is Diane Santam, who's coming from the local crowd. The local crowd is awesome for this panel because they are both demonstrating rewards crowdfunding and transitioning into a cooperative governance structure. So Diane, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Thank you, Mica. I'm so glad to be here. And so let me just give you a little rundown of what the local crowd is. It's a rewards-based crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, where people will get a reward for making their contribution. And it is localized. So it is hosted by local communities. So it becomes the local crowd, Laramie, Wyoming, or Monadnock, New Hampshire, or something, where, so it becomes, it takes the science of crowdfunding, which we know is that most of the money raised from a crowd fund comes from the efforts of the crowdfunder and his or her team. So they have to work to reach out to their networks. And by having it localized, and it's hosted usually by an economic development group, chamber, something like that, you have a group that is spring-loaded to support you. So you are not like in your basement doing your crowdfunding. You have a community that gets it because they brought and hosted the platform, and they jump into it for you. So that really helps leverage the effect of that. So that's one piece of it. And another piece we've been hearing a lot about in this conference, kind of the complications of regulation crowdfunding. And somebody said earlier, well, we would like to not have to have so many lawyers involved. And somebody also said, you know, making your first contribution and doing your first campaign is like, you don't want to be hitting a fastball without like maybe doing some little league before you get there. So we are part of the continuum of funding, helping people build their networks, raise some money, do some great things, and we really fit into that like Main Street small business space.
Great, thank you so much. Maybe in our question and answer section, we can get into your cooperative structure as well.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we decided. Sorry, I forgot that.
Oh, yeah,
We decided. We started as an LLC, and we decided over time we always wanted to be, you know, really a local business. And over time we realized in order to do that, we needed to switch to a cooperative form so that the people, it's really a local thing. It's because ownership and share in the revenues happens at that local level by being a member of the cooperative. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. I am going to pass off to our next panelist, Ojan Mobashahi, who is from the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. This, or EBPREC, which you heard Brett mention it with that shortened title. This is a really cool project. It's done a lot of these strategies actually that Brett mentioned, done a lot of different levels of raises depending on what was happening in that moment for the cooperative. So I'm excited to hear about your journey, Ojan.
Thanks, Mica. Hey, everybody. Ojan, I'm the finance director of East Bay PREC. We're a BIPOC-led organization based in Oakland, California, working to organize with our frontline community to finance, acquire, and steward property for the long term. So we're like a housing co-op that doesn't just do one property at a time, or just doesn't do one property, but we sort of are accumulating a portfolio of properties, allowing our residents to build limited equity, but the cooperative and the community through ownership of that cooperative to build assets and power in the real estate industry and in our built environment in a way that we haven't had in our BIPOC community for a long time. So that's a little bit about what we do. As Mica said, we've done a lot of different sorts of crowdfunding. We incorporated as a California Cooperative Corporation back in 2017 in order to use a specific cooperative exemption. I think in California, a normal business can sell shares to unaccredited investors, right? People who don't have a net worth of $1 million or make over $250K a year. To folks who are not accredited investors, you can only sell a share for like $300 per person. This law center passed some legislation in California to increase that to $1,000 per person for cooperatives. So that's how we launched initially. We raised about $200,000 by selling like individual shares to people for $1,000 per person. And it was just in California. So that sort of let us get enough to do our first project in partnership with the land trust. And actually for that same project, we did a small private offering because we wanted to raise like $250,000, and we had a few, like they were sort of friends and family, folks who had been involved in the co-op for a while, like knew our business really well. They had already bought like a single share and they wanted to invest more. So we saw one way to do that was to do the friends and family offering to bring in another like $50,000, or I think it was $75,000 from like 3 or 4 individuals. So those were our first 2 methods. And then one of our lawyers at the time, was looking at ways for us to increase that. And we looked at Regulation A crowdfunding. So I guess we were doing Regulation A plus tier 2 is the full, if you want to look it up. And Brett is, full disclosure, one of our securities lawyers. And per regulation, I'm supposed to share our offering circular with you whenever I sort of talk about it. So you can see our full offering circular there in the chat. We're about to submit an updated version pretty soon here the SEC. But so that's a much sort of more complicated process where we had to submit this offering circular and request the SEC to qualify it. Once they qualified it, we could sell more than one share per person. We could always sell more than one share to accredited investors, I think. But for unaccredited investors, now we can sell more than one share, and we can also sell in more states now. So each state, we had to go through a separate process. Some of them were like, no, you don't have to do any registration with us. Some of them you just have to file a form. Some of them you have to get a broker dealer license. And so some of them were just out of range for us. But now we're selling in about 20 states plus Washington, DC. And it's allowed us to bring in it's allowed us to blend our target audiences, if you will, right? Our average investor, I guess like most investors just have one share. We have 350 investors to date, and the average is around 9,000, a little over 9,000 per person, with I think only 80 of those investors having bought more than one share, the most having bought 500 shares, right? Which is some investment advisory firm advised one of their clients who's moving like lots of money into impact to invest in us to buy 500 shares. So it's really allowed us to have higher level or larger scale investors be like in the same pool as your everyday community investor, and each investor gets one vote. So just because you buy more equity doesn't mean you actually have a larger share or a larger say in what the cooperative does. I think I've probably taken up my 5 minutes, but yeah, happy to chat.
Yeah, no rush. If you have anything else, you good? Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. So our last panelist, we're going to give a little overview and then jump into some questions, some more discussion, and then open it up for the audience. But our last panelist is Alyssa Orlando, who is currently with Zebras Unite, but formerly ran I'm like, I don't know what your official title was, but was working with the Drivers Cooperative and helped run this incredible regulation crowdfunding raise where they raised over $1 million. Amazing. With this really radical project, a driver-owned Uber alternative in New York City. So Alyssa, take it away.
Yeah, in true co-op fashion, we had 3 managing directors, so it got very confusing. But yeah, it's so interesting. This is actually my first time hearing the continuum of crowdfunding. And so I'm posting the 2 crowdfunding campaigns we did. One was donation-based and happened in Giving Tuesday 2020, and the second was launched in April 2021 and was a Reg CF campaign. And you can see the very different levels of professionalism required in the 2. But yeah, so as mentioned, the Drivers Cooperative is 100% worker-owned transportation cooperative. Does some consumer ride hailing, but really found this carved niche in government transportation. So does paratransit for people with disabilities, Medicaid non-emergency medical transportation, and voter turnout for the Board of Elections and select candidates. And this was my first foray into the co-op sector. I came from the venture-backed world, the private equity world. And so I came in and was like, we're going to raise a $3 million seed round, no problem. And I remember telling this to Melissa, who heads Dowie, and she was like, okay, like we'll see. And so started having conversations with different venture investors actually. And it was just so clear that because there was no liquidation event, that this was just never going to happen. And so started what I just posted in the chat was sort of our journey of, first we repurposed a grant from the Workers Lab, then we did the crowdfunding donation campaign, then we raised money from CDFIs focused on cooperatives, but we just kept hitting the ceiling because debt investors needed either cash flow or collateral, which as a platform we didn't have. And as a startup, we also didn't have. And so, but what we did have is we had a lot of press and we had a lot of rider signups. And so how can we use our assets of an engaged driver community, rider signups, and press to raise the capital that you need to compete in this incredibly capital intensive industry? So that's what led to the launch of the Reg CF. And every time I launch a crowdfunding campaign, I feel like I'm jumping off a cliff with the blindfolds, and I like have to step away from my computer for the first 2 hours so I don't constantly refresh. But we got lucky in the fact that, to be honest, there were two total stranger $250,000 investors that really showed momentum that allowed other people to come in. And the other huge advantage of Reg CF is when big players came back to us because of a New York Times piece, because we were raising over $1 million, that had said no to us before and then started asking for preferential terms. We were able to say, I'm sorry, do you want a higher return than our driver member who invested? And it was just so clear that it was not even a negotiation. These are the terms, take it or leave it. And I think that power that was created through Reg CF was very powerful.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So I'm just going to ask some questions, and any of the panelists feel free to jump in. So my first question is about, as we've heard from a few of these panelists, raising money from the crowd is difficult. It requires a totally different set of skills than you would need doing other capital raises, and it's pretty challenging. So I want to hear why you decided to raise money from the crowd, or why you support that method. And what are the risks and what are the challenges that you faced in that process?
I'll jump in because we're teaching this all the time to people, is that there are benefits to a crowdfunding that are beyond the money. You build your network, you learn how to work your network, you learn how to make your ask. So I think that there sometimes, the money is the least valuable things. You're out there, like Alyssa just said, unknown people giving $250,000. How would you do that without being that visibly out there and building your network? And so I think there's a lot of value about that also you meet partners, and then that translates to, depending on where you are in the continuum of funding, the ability to raise more funds. I remember a quote from Investment Magazine that said, don't show me your business plan, show me your crowdfund. And we heard somebody talk about that in the conference, because it shows you can do it. So it really is a business building tool in addition to a money raising tool.
I'm curious to hear about this in the context of the cooperative identity. You chose a business model that a lot of people are not choosing, which some people would say is a little more complicated. And you're doing the crowdfunding method, a little more complicated than just communicating with a single investor, if you can get lucky. So I'm curious to hear if crowdfunding, or the decision to raise money from a crowd, was related to your decision to choose a cooperative model.
Mm-hmm. For us, it definitely was. I think people are looking for a way to be in solidarity, right? Especially like in real estate, right? A lot of people move to Oakland because they got a tech job in San Francisco and they don't want to be a gentrifier, but they functionally are, and they don't know how to do anything different besides like be nice to your neighbors. Like, that's great, but that's, so to be able to offer them a tool where they can actually invest their money in a program, in a business that is fighting gentrification, I think it's actually like a product that's not really out there. There's not a lot of ways for everyday people to put their money somewhere that's doing good. And we are, just to be clear, we offer a 1.5% return. We're not a competitive, real estate investment. We're like more competitive with like a certificate of deposit in a bank. But there's, it's $1,000 share. There's lots of people who will feel really good about moving some of their money into that kind of product.
Mm.
And it as a part of the cooperative, it's not just your money, like you also become a member, right? So there's really a felt sense of solidarity there.
What is that like for the investor members? What's their experience?
They very clearly have a back seat. If you're just an investor, because you can be from New York and be an investor, right? You don't really participate in the day-to-day of the cooperative, but you get regular updates, and you're invited to our annual member meeting. So there is a place where you can participate. You get to elect 2 of our board members. You're a part of the member body who elects those. Yeah, and you can become a community owner and get more involved if you live in the East Bay as well.
I
And
also
we're-
think, oh, go ahead.
I'll just say we're paying dividends for the first time this year. Our board meeting last night made it official after 3 years of saying, we're going to do this later because the administrative burden, we're finally doing it. And we
Congrats.
launched 4 years ago.
That's awesome.
Go ahead,
think-
Lisa.
Something, so for me, it was really around setting terms and having non-accredited investors participate. But there's two sides of that. I think the three things that were challenging about it, the first is brand risk. Like we were coming out with this shiny brand off of press, and if we failed, that was going to be a very public failure, versus if you have a couple backroom conversations with philanthropy and that's a failure, no one needs to know that.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge concern on the brand risk side. The second was how it affects team dynamics. So for example, we had someone on our team who came from the tech world and he had a lot of wealthy friends. He brought in a lot of money. That did affect team dynamics, right? And to the extent that you're calling on friends and family, like that does affect personal relationships. I mean, I have an aunt who was an executive at J&J and she gave $2,000 to the donation campaign. And I felt so awkward about that, at different family events. And then the last is on the non-accredited investor point. I mean, how is this not a multi-level marketing scheme? Or how do you not feel like you're selling a bad investment? And, our driver base, like I kept saying, do not put in money that you cannot lose. Please, 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 because it was a very risky investment. And yeah, you fill out 90 pages of disclosures to the SEC. But if you have someone super hype about the cooperative, they're going to max out their $2,200. And I just had a massive level of anxiety of managing $2,200 that matters to someone versus accredited investors. If I lose your $2,200, I did my best. This is your professional job. Sorry.
We lost Brett. Yeah, definitely, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I've heard that same feeling. And it's interesting, cooperatives are kind of like the only business that I can think of where it's actually sometimes can be problematic when people have money to put in. It's like such a funny world where, normally if you're starting a business, if you got extra cash lying around, that simplifies things. And then cooperatives, it adds a layer of complexity, which is, ironic. So I've got two other questions and then I'll open it up. When I was finding a panel for this breakout room, I was actually realizing that not that many cooperatives have used regulation crowdfunding. And I'm curious if any of the panelists, particularly Alyssa, with your experience, do you know why that is? Do you have any ideas about why that is? And is there something missing sort of in the sport ecosystem for cooperatives?
Yeah, so something I feel strongly about is that securities lawyers, no offense, should not ask for their money up front, and CPAs should not ask for their money up front, because it creates this barrier that's around $25,000 to $30,000 that says you're going to make this huge risk. You might not even make this back. You might be $25,000 to $30,000 in the hole. Versus if you look at venture raises or search fund raises or some of these other raises, all of the professional services are paid upon raise. And so there's those aligned incentives. And knowing how hard it is to raise capital for cooperatives, I think if we could defer a lot of those legally required professional services fees, specifically security lawyers and CPAs, we would see a lot more people taking the risk if it was like, I don't know what the official term is, paid on success or contingency based or whatever, but you paid after you raised.
Makes a lot of sense. We lost Brett, it looks like, which is unfortunate because I wanted to hear his take on my next question. But does anyone else want to speak to that?
Am I live?
Yes, yeah.
I'm live. Okay. I was wondering if any of the group, we started syndicating in 1979, so we've been around for a while. But does anyone else combine Section 1031 tax deferred exchanges into their crowdfunding efforts?
great question for possibly Brett, who is back on. Oh, apologies.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm on my phone, not sure what happened to my computer, but the whole thing's not working right now. So anyway, you'll just have me on audio for a minute. So I'm not a tax lawyer and I'm not your lawyer, obviously, but just a caveat on the 1031. Usually 1031, it has to be an investment in real estate directly. Right. And in most cases, when you're investing in a cooperative, even if it happens to own real estate, you won't, it would not be a qualified property for 1031 purposes.
We try to put them together so that we're not doing the formal cooperative type thing. We're doing mostly limited partnerships on a very small basis. We've been doing it for a long time, and for the last 2 years I haven't done anything except COVID. But we do have. I think it is an interesting area if you're doing a limited partnership to add the Section 1031 tax deferred exchange person to your possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that would be really interesting to check out. And I think as the cooperative movement expands steadily, we're seeing more creative applications. So there are like professional organizations like mine or like architecture firms that are forced to be a certain legal structure, but still sort of look carefully at the cooperative values and how to incorporate thinking about residency, like co-housing. And yeah, it would be really neat to think through how to build the cooperative principles, transparency, support for other cooperatives, shared profits, one member, one vote, concern for community into a sort of tenancy in common or other sort of common legal ownership structure to still take advantage of those 1031 features.
We've got some interest from Ojan. I'd be very interested in talking more and learning more about that. So you two can share contact information in the chat. It sounds super interesting. I have one more question that's like one of my favorite things to talk about if I am looking to get frustrated with the economy, which is liquidation events. So Alyssa mentioned this, went to early investors who were just not interested at all in something that needed a lot of investment at the beginning. If there was no, you were never planning to sell to Uber eventually. There was no liquidation event. This is a challenge for cooperatives. The idea of a cooperative is to not have that happen. You either want it to stick around and continue serving the members, or it lives its lifespan and maybe it doesn't serve the members anymore and then it goes away. But the idea is not to sell out to a bigger company to make a big return. And that is a tough pill to swallow for investors. So I'm curious how others have dealt with that, if that's come up when you're talking to investors, when you're talking to people who are interested in being founders of the cooperative. Is that ever a barrier for you?
Recording in progress.
Yeah, of course. Pop in early to make sure that I wasn't.
No.
Sorry, everyone. Excitement of Zoom. I think one way that I like to think about this is around investment as a manner of stewardship. There's a lot of ways in which investing with the hopes of 100x returns and the marketing behind that and the outcomes of that have destroyed communities, the environment, our structure, lots of people's lives. And so I think, just resetting expectations to say, investors in some ways in cooperatives are people who are willing who for whatever reason have some capital that they're able to put towards this for a time. And maybe they want that capital back and the possibility of some return, but then trying to think about an exit as like, what's a way to eventually redeem or cash out your return or your investment down the road with whatever returns you've gotten, and hopefully at that time someone will be able to step up. And so I know that model works better for some business structures than others, but like any worker or user-owned cooperative, same with investors, you sort of expect a constant in and out flow of people who are stepping up and saying, this is my time, I'm ready to put my capital behind this so that it can continue happening today.
I think if I were to start a co-op again, like something I would love to experiment with is like create a C corporation, have the co-op own 100%, and then sell equity in the C corp, and then have the co-op provide the liquidation. So say like, okay, once we have cash flows, we know there are a whole bunch of debt financiers out there within the co-op space. And if you get to the point where your business can be underwritten as a business rather than a startup, and you're able to get debt based on your cash flows, you can buy out those equity investors at an agreed upon valuation or at an independent valuation. And we actually treat co-ops more like ESOP conversions, whereby the co-op is actually buying back the equity it sold. So because I think if we keep pushing these concessionary returns, we're not going to be able to raise the 5 million a year that we can via regulation crowdfunding. I mean, the drivers co-op could have raised up to 2.5. We only got to 1.62, And so I think this is a huge ethical question for the sector, right? Do we actually offer more like 15% returns, right? Returns that reflect the risk that, especially in services co-ops, people are actually taking, and then buy back what we've sold after a period of time using the debt infrastructure that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not from like the venture world and haven't done a lot of fundraising outside of EB-Prec, so I don't know about all the language. But so the way EB-Prec is structured, our investor owner shares have a 5-year minimum term. So after 5 years, investors can ask for their shares back. And so in a way, we provide more liquidity to investors than just like a sort of permanent equity investment where you get a preferred return. Our return is lower at 1.5%. It is backed by real estate, so it's less risky than like the drivers co-op, right? But after 5 years, we model our investments that after 5 or 10 years, or like depending on the project, we can, buy out those investors with relation to whatever particular property we like raise the investments for. We give ourselves a little flexibility where we can actually convert their equity into a promissory note if we don't have the liquidity at that time, but it's a maximum 5-year extension, and we know that's not going to look good for us if we do it. So we really do want to try to be able to liquidate those shares after 5 years. And we're coming up on 4 years now for our first investors. So we're going to see how many of our investors actually do want to cash out their share after 5 years versus how much you're going to let it ride for longer because they're continuing to accrue dividends and all that. So it is an interesting model to like have this sort of long-term equity, which is like pending some sellout versus being able to internally buy out your investors with some predetermined terms is important to make sure that you can actually do that. But it's never going to appeal to venture capital, which wants to maximize their return, right? Because you're not going to want to buy your own company out for that excise or like crazy return.
Yeah.
One thing I saw yesterday that I thought was very interesting, relevant to this, Sherwood Neese was kind of predicting the future of crowdfunding. And he said, like within 3 years, secondary trading would be coming online, in which other people could buy because, they could sell their interest. And so that they don't have to wait for the cooperative or the company to have a liquidation event. They'll be able to have some trading to get liquid without having an event.
Yeah, that really interests me because there's nothing has looked like that in the cooperative movement before. So it would definitely be a shift. I am going to pass it off to the audience. I see kind of a question from Vince. Do you want to elaborate on that, or do we just want to riff on exit to community, which is super interesting?
Oh yeah, I've heard it. I actually have heard it from Zebras Unite, Nathan Schneider in Boston. Just some background. I am based, despite the background, I'm based in Denver, Colorado. I'm one of the core leaders of Black Lives Matter, but I come to that from years in investment banking and media and tech banking at Goldman, Morgan Stanley, Robertson Stevens. So I've seen things from the belly of the beast. And, one of the things that is interesting is like for Black folks, we're like, just when we get to the table, after we've been begging for 400 years, begging rich white folks, generally men, for the money that we've helped them make, either in the philanthropic industrial complex or in the venture. It's crazy. Capital is accrued labor, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And we spend 8 hours making it for people, and then we spend 8 hours trying to get it back. But we feel like just as we come to the table, we want to do community economics, but we want that woman who started an incredible restaurant to be able to convert to a co-op, but have some sort of exit that other people have had for all this time, and be able to have a liquidity event so that that person can buy a house and, retire. So we are looking at ways either through exit to community. I like the New Majority Funds or New Majority Ventures approach of basically doing ESOP LBOs. And I think we need to think creatively about how you can have that cooperative permanent community capital, but give founders an opportunity to have an exit, not a G5 kind of exit, but a house kind of exit, and also be able to maintain capital in a permanent space. Because this is the Mondragon that we have to create here, but we have to do it in a way that makes it interesting for people who are innovators and have a lot of other opportunities, but are also principally driven, but don't want to give up return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And I think Alyssa alluded to this. There is sort of this ethical, moral question. I mean, there are people in the co-op world who say co-ops shouldn't raise money. People should be gifting them just, through programs like the Local Crowd, and there are organizations like EB Prec that are able to sort of generate substantial returns substantial investments with only low returns. And so there's definitely a balance there. And even like the idea of founders paying, reward for your founders, that's like really actually true. That's like so true to the cooperative movement, because it's basically an acknowledgement that founders are putting in all of this unpaid labor. As you were saying, it's like, it's all the labor. And so most of the capital that's demanding these high returns, why should, they stole it, it's stolen money anyway. So, there's definitely a choice you as a cooperative have to make around like how and from whom and where are we raising our money. And I think many of us who work in and with cooperatives, it's sort of encouraging to make those decisions as a group in many cases.
I know I'm going to stop taking up so much space. I spent some time in Germany, and one of the things that they have in their constitution is Mitbestimmung, which is the together voting, where constitutionally every company over a certain size has to have at least 49% voting representation on the board of directors from labor. So perhaps there could be something where in the cooperative, the founder has that the majority, and 49% is in the hands of labor. And then when they are making their exit, the model that you're talking about, Alyssa, where it's a cash flow exit and you're basically doing a leverage buyout, not to destroy the company, but actually to sell it to the workers. That might be something that could be viable. But I definitely wonder about that, Brett, from a structuring standpoint. Do you see anything where founders are given some, override in order to recognize that accrued labor?
Yes.
I'm curious to hear from Diane or Ojan, like the founders of your businesses, co-ops. Like, is that a consideration, especially for you, Diane? You're in the process of transitioning right now. How are you handling that?
Yeah, well, we are exiting to community. I mean, I am coming to retirement age, and so that is our strategy, is our customers are going to be the owners of the company. That we're exiting to our customers. But it is requiring the formation of a new organization. So we're now going to become a startup, but the startup will obtain the assets of the existing LLC. The startup co-op will.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. We're thinking about giving a small share of a corporation to everyone that does any business with us at all, which obviously it would be a corporation that would have hopefully hundreds of investors in it, technically, or owners, I should say. So it would be a new way, or a different way of getting a cooperative group, because everybody would stand to benefit, and they would be excellent advertisements for the things to do your 1031 exchange or to do the crowdfunding platform offering to raise money for your project. It may be crazy, but that's what we're doing.
It's also worth pointing out, if Alyssa has time to put on her zebra hat, the zebras have structured themselves so that it has all these different classes of ownership. The founders have one, institutional members, investors like me have another. We don't get to vote, and the co-op members have all the voting privileges except for the founders. Alyssa may know that I'm wrong on that.
No, you're right. 4 classes of shares.
And it's very confusing.
Well, isn't business confusing just generally? Investing.
We're gonna get kicked out of this room. This is an awesome discussion. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Thanks. Terrific.
Hey, Devin.
Howdy. How are you, Patrick?
Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, I'm going to give you powers here to.
Wow, I don't have power.
Yeah, I've got to give you. What is wrong here? Well, let me give you. Oh, you're not on a computer. You're on your phone.
Yes, I am.
So let's ask. Is Tori around?
Yeah, I think I heard her laughing.
Tori, are you on your computer?
I am, yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to record because, and I apologize for that.
No worries.
Haven't been prompted, trained, and organized on that, but you only can record if you're on a computer. You can't do it from a phone. So
perfect.
Okay.
Does that mean that I won't be recorded?
You will be recorded, but you can't do the recording.
Got it. I don't have the power. Tori has the power. Perfect.
Yep. Tori has the power now.
Excellent.
So it says we're recording, correct? Everybody got that?
I don't know that you don't need to start the recording until you get into your breakout room.
Oh.